Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next session in our Export Skills program. And today we continue our marketing masterclass and continuing with branding. Today, looking at building a brand. I'm Collins Rex. I'm a director with the Global Trade Professionals Alliance, and the GTPA is an organisation that cultivates international standards, and our aim is to create a trade environment that is both inclusive and trusted by all. And of course, as you know by now, the GTPA has partnered with Global Victoria to deliver this comprehensive export skills program. And the export skills program starting to move towards the pointy end now. We've got another month to go, and then it's the end of the program. So within that month, a whole heap of great stuff still to come. If you haven't registered for everything that you want to be part of, make sure that you visit the address on the screen and get those registrations in as quickly as possible. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which for me is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islanders people who might be joining us on today's webinar. As always, just cast your eyes over the disclaimer that you see on the screen and bear in mind that all information is of a general nature. So if you are going to apply it to your business, make sure that it is applicable. And of course, as you know by now, this webinar is being recorded. So as I mentioned, my name is Collins Rex. I'm the owner and director of Rex Ideas, and I'm also the director for Asia and Africa of the Global Trade Professionals Alliance. And marketing is certainly something that is very close to my heart and a subject about which I'm always quite delighted to speak. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. If they are relevant to the conversation at the time, I'll take them as we go through. And if not, we'll keep them at the end. And yes, as always, you may get a copy of today's slide deck just by sending me an email, and I'll certainly send you the deck. And the recording of this webinar, along with all the others as part of this program, will be made available by Global Victoria at the end of the program, and the webinars will be made available through their website. So let's get straight into it, the all-important subject of building a brand. Today, we're going to look at the characteristics of a successful brand. We'll touch on brand strategy. And finally, we're going to look at very important information around protecting your brand. And finally, of course, as always, questions. So what exactly is it that makes a successful brand? Well, a successful brand knows its target audience. It's absolutely crucial that you know who your audience is. If you don't, well, quite frankly, you are barking up the wrong tree. You're marketing your services in the wrong way to the right people or in the right way to the wrong people. Either way, you're not going to sell very much, and your brand is not going to have the cut through that it is expected to. Once you've established who you are selling to, you need to understand how those people like to be engaged with. So whether it's through looking at what successful competitors have done, whether it's by doing market research or testing a few theories live to see what works and what doesn't, you need to understand where it is that your target customers are shopping and what it is that your target customers look for in a brand. A successful brand is genuine and it's passionate. The truth is, consumers don't like being cheated, and they certainly don't like deceitful brands. And that's why things like exposés and employee whistleblowers are so damaging to businesses. Customers like to believe in the brands that they support, and they are horribly disillusioned when they find out that something nefarious has been going on. It really doesn't matter what size your business is or how influential you as a business and a brand is. If your customers get a bad taste in the mouth from what they read or see about you, They will be leaving you and not returning. You need to be creating a trusting, trustworthy, and genuine image through branding. And of course, this does take skill and a lot of hard work, but it is very important if you wish to gain the respect of your consumers and, strangely enough, also your competition. Because if your competition respects you, even if they don't like you, chances are they're not going to go out of their way to, in any shape, size, or form, disadvantage you. A successful brand is unforgettable and it's unique. Memorable brands definitely stick in the minds of consumers. If I asked you right now to name 2 soft drink companies, there's a pretty good chance that of the 3, you would mention Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Why is that? Well, despite the fact that these 2 are very competitive brands, they've both built incredibly successful brands over a long period of time, and they've maintained the awareness of those brands. Those brands are instantly recognizable, they're front of mind, and that is what you are going to be aiming for with your own brand. That when a consumer thinks of your market sector, when they think of products and services such as yours, it's your brand that comes to mind. Because if that's the case, yours is the one they will choose to purchase from. A successful brand influences others. Market leaders are called leaders for a very good reason. They're called leaders because that is what they do, and they also inspire others in the same field. They start trends, they don't follow them. If you find that one of your competitors is copying what you do, your first instinct is going to be annoyance. But the truth is you should actually be quite flattered because it is a compliment. It's a sign that you're doing things right. And it also means that you just have to keep one step ahead and keep doing it better than the competition that's copying you. A successful brand reaches its audience. Brands are useless if they don't get the right exposure. So this means not only do you need to build a brand, but you need to find a way to bring that brand to the attention of your consumers. The more you do that, the more likely you are to be more successful than your counterparts. And of course, that means you need a sound brand strategy. Now, as I have tended to harp on over the past weeks and continually do, there is a very real difference between having a strategy and just doing stuff. Activities do not a strategy make. The strategy is all about understanding why it is that you are aiming to do the things you do and then doing those things. So why does your brand matter? Well, marketing is all about communicating with your audience, and brand development is a very important part of that communication. It's an ongoing process. The truth is you never will be in a position when you say, I'm done with this brand, I've done everything I can to establish it, and now I'm just going to let it run its course. It's an ongoing process because your brand is and needs to be a living thing. Your brand, and even the most successful brands in the world, cannot stultify. You need to constantly be working on making sure that that brand is still relevant, that it is still speaking to a changing market, that it is doing the things you set out for it to do. And perhaps you also need to rethink some of your goals and objectives with the brand as time goes by. It's also vitally important that your brand strategy needs to be refined for every single market that you enter. In some cases, this refinement could be very subtle. In others, it could be really radical, but it always needs to be part of successfully expanding your business. You might have to change the way your brand is presented through the coloring of your logo, through the wording you use in a slug line. It could be in the way in which you approach your marketing strategy overall, but every market is going to have different demands of you. Case in point, if we look at one of the world's best known brands, KFC, which started its life as Kentucky Fried Chicken, and of course it became very unpopular to refer to fried anything for a while, so they became KFC. It's quite interesting that in most parts of the world, they've actually started in their marketing and in their advertising to reintroduce fried chicken because it's become popular again. But if we look at KFC, which as a brand is so instantly recognizable, if you look at the two images, we see KFC that we know in the bottom right hand, and the top left, we see PFK with the good old Colonel's picture there. So we know that it's probably related in some way or another. Well, in French Canada, you cannot call something KFC because you cannot call it by an English name. It has to be French. So in that part of the world, Kentucky Fried Chicken is poulet free Kentucky. And that means changes to the way the brand is presented. And for them to be selling there, they had to put their pride away and say, this is what we will need to do. So how does your brand affect your business? Your brand, of course, exists only in the way in which people perceive it. It really doesn't matter how you think you've represented it. If your audience sees it differently, that is what your brand will ultimately be. How your audience, your potential customers, think and feel about your brand will have a huge influence on the success or conversely the failure of your business. Whether they'll make the shift from being audience to customer depends entirely on your perceived brand value. So whether they start at the top of the funnel as potential leads and make their way all the way through to being engaged customers depends entirely on the way your brand is perceived. Of course, it also has an influence on whether these customers remain with you, become loyal to you, and become repeat customers. If they are to keep coming back to your products and services, it all depends on your brand reliability. In order to develop a brand strategy, there are a few key areas that you have to have in place. And the first of those is that you need to identify and examine your target audience. So, of course, you know what it is you're going to sell, and you have a pretty good idea of what it is you want to say about that. But you need to understand who needs to hear it. The opinions of your target audience are the ones which are most relevant. So there's a multitude of potential customers out there, but not all of those potential customers are your potential customers. So you need to identify your ideal customer, and then you are going to target your brand development to that customer. Try to think of as many characteristics of your customers as you can. And of course, you're going to think about things like socio-demographic categories. Are they male? Are they female? Are they in a particular age bracket? Are they in a particular income bracket, etc.? But also, how do they behave? Where do they go to make their shopping decisions? Where do they shop? What is important to them outside of consumerism? Are they people that play sport? Are they people who go to the theatre, for example? What are their interests? Very importantly, what are their values? Do they care about the environment? Do they care about being inclusive, etc.? So once you've conveyed that picture to your own mind, you then need to start thinking, what in a brand will appeal to this ideal target audience? And the way in which you do that is not by guessing, it is by measuring. You need to validate your assumptions through research. So you've identified your target audience. Now you're going to start testing your ideas about brand values, about the way in which you promote your brand to that target audience. You're going to do it through polls, you're going to do it through surveys, you're going to do it by getting them into a room and actually testing it with them. Ultimately, you need to understand whether the target audience you have indicated as being your ideal one relates to your brand. You need to define your mission and your vision. In business, every activity has, and if it doesn't, it should have a goal or a vision. And the common goal that all of your combined business dealings are supposed to achieve is defined in your mission statement. There has to be a very clear reason for getting into any business, or expanding into any market, or expanding a product line, or changing a brand. And it needs to be more than just making money. Everybody needs to make money. There's no denying that. And indeed, you shouldn't be embarrassed about that. The truth is, you cannot be a business if you do not make money, but there needs to be more to it than that. Of course, whatever the reasoning you have for being in this business and for developing this brand has to also resonate with your target audience. Perhaps there's a specific problem that your target audience has that you're trying to solve, or it could simply be improving the well-being of a group with what you have to offer. If you are, for example, a manufacturer of food products, perhaps you're trying to replace an unhealthy food choice with a healthier one while not sacrificing anything in the flavor, stakes, etc. You're trying to improve lives while offering an alternative. Perhaps the problem that you're trying to solve is a problem around one of the large issues like climate change. Perhaps what you have is a new energy product, for example, that could help solve some of the problems that we face there. Defining the outcome once you've achieved your goal is then called your vision statement. So while you'll be using your mission to appeal to people's values and beliefs, you'll use your vision, your future gazing, if you like, to make a connection with people's hopes and dreams. And of course, along the way, you're also going to be realizing your own. To develop a successful brand strategy, you also need to identify and analyze your competition. Very important step, and something that many businesses tend to neglect and really not do as well as they should. Competitor analysis, of course, is the process of evaluating the behavior of your competitors in order to get a better idea of their positioning in the market and the activities that enabled their positioning. You'll be looking at their content, which is everything from their website, to the way in which they describe their website, to blog posts, to public relations activities, to advertising, etc. And you'll then be drawing conclusions about how that is helping them achieve their branding and business development goals. If you've spotted a specific action that has brought results, try to understand what it is they were trying to achieve by using that channel. There might have been a problem that they were trying to resolve, and this was a particularly successful way to convey that. What were the exact conditions that allowed their activity to boost their brand status? Because if you can figure that out, you can apply similar logic to your own. You need to understand what your competitors are doing, but you really do need to avoid copying them directly at all costs. Understand what they're doing, apply some of the principles that they've applied, but do it in your own unique way, because just copying is not going to win you any market share. When you're developing your brand strategy, please involve your employees. Your employees really do need to buy into this, but it's more than that. Your employees also have a great deal to offer. If your employees understand the importance of your brand and how you arrived at your brand identity, for example, they will support it. And if they support it, the brand will be effective. But extend it beyond just your staff members to your in-country partners, to any distributors you may have, any agents you may have appointed in new markets. So enlist the aid of all the people involved in your organization to help you spread the message of this brand identity that you've worked so hard to create. Remember, everything your business does is linked to your brand in one way or another. Even the way your employees dress and the way your employees behave has an impact on your brand. So ensure that your employees are brought along on this journey. They understand how their own actions will affect the brand, and make sure that they buy into the brand strategy. Every one of your employees is almost certainly going to have their own ideas of your business, what the business stands for, what the business does, etc. They can provide valuable insights along your branding journey by pointing out to you that what you're trying to do there is not the way they see the business operating, or indeed the way customers that they interact with have told them they see the business. You might want to tweak what you do, or you might want to incorporate some of those views, because maybe your view isn't quite as accurate as the view of the people who interact with your brand. Don't ever discount an opinion. Make sure that you find a way to listen to it and to take it on board in one form or another. Now let's look at how you define your brand. The first step in building your brand strategy from scratch is to define your brand. And this can be broken down into a few basic categories. First of all, there's brand personality. A brand personality is a set of human characteristics that are attributed to your business and to your brand. Building a consistent brand personality that permeates through all of your external facing communication helps to build brand equity. Just as you build equity in your home by improving your home, the more you work on your brand, the more valuable that brand becomes. When you ideate your brand personality, ensure that it aligns with your products and services. For example, if you're a law firm, it's likely that you'll want to be seen as trustworthy and strong. So you're not going to develop a brand that is really playful, that is seen to be lightweight. It has to have a certain gravitas. But conversely, if you work for a creative agency, you want to be seen as creative. You want to be seen as playful. You're going to come up with a different identity and a different personality for every brand that you could possibly think of. Your brand has a voice. So just as in brand personality, a brand voice is about ensuring that there is uniformity in the way your brand speaks. Your brand speaks the words that you write for it, essentially. So the grammar that you use, the tone that you use, the word choice that you use needs to communicate your brand. So again, if we look at the example of the law firm is going to be using business language. It's going to be serious in its tone. It's not going to use buzzwords. It's not going to be using jargon that is commonly used on the street. It's probably also going to use language appealing to a slightly older demographic than if, for example, you were selling a consumer product like ice cream. The voice of your brand is how the brand conveys its brand personality to an outside audience. Some common themes are things like friendly, approachable, and understanding. The next point is brand identity. So your brand identity is composed of the visual elements that help communicate your brand. So this is literally what people see and what they will identify as your brand. So here we're looking at things like color palettes, graphic design, logos, images, bearing in mind that the logo is not the brand. The brand is considerably wider than just the logo, but the logo is the thing that people will see first, identify first, and then associate with all the other issues that we have already raised. The goal of the visual aids is to make your brand easily distinguishable from others and also identifiable to both new and existing customers. It's very important that your brand has values. A brand is far more than products or services. It's about the values and the ethics a customer has, and that is becoming considerably more important. Customers are caring more and more about what brands stand for than just what the brand is. They are caring more about the values and the ethics than just about the product or the service that they purchase by acknowledging the brand. Customers like to believe that they're putting their money to good use. Interweaving your values with all of your messaging helps to achieve that. So, for example, I sit on the steering committee, the volunteer steering committee of the South African Film Festival, which is just wrapping up. The South African Film Festival is obviously, it's a film festival. It screens movies, but it brands itself as a festival with a conscience, and it actively promotes that branding, and it actively pursues the ethos of that branding through a number of different things. On the one hand, it actively seeks films that are of a certain kind, a certain quality, that have a certain message, that convey a certain image of the country that they represent. But very importantly, it also donates all the proceeds of the festival to a charity. And it is very clear about who that charity is, what they do with the money, and why it is important for a consumer not just to buy a ticket to enjoy a good film, but to feel good about what the money is doing. So that is the sort of thing that you aim to do with your brand value. When you are determining your brand and the strategy around it, you need to define your identity. And one of the ways in which you do that is by choosing a name for your brand. And you've got to get the name right. Now, you're an existing business, you've already got a brand. But if you are going into a new market, you may have to entirely rethink that brand. And that means you have to come up with a new name for it. So usually when people think of the term brand, they think of the name and they think of the logo, and they think that that is what the brand is. It's very easy to understand why people believe it's the most important aspect of brand development strategy, because it's the thing they interact with most. Not having the proper foundation name and logo development would be the equivalent of throwing darts with a blindfold on. Doesn't make sense, and chances are you're going to miss that all-important target audience. So think of a name that's memorable, that's concise, and rationally connected to the product or service that you're providing. Don't try to be too clever with your brand name, because if you're too clever, people won't know what it is you're trying to sell. And of course, ensure that the name you select makes sense in every single one of your target markets. And we've already looked at the example of KFC. KFC is not known as KFC in French Canada. It has to make sense in the context of the location. One of the hallmarks of a successful brand is when it turns from being just a name into a noun or a verb used in common language. So we all say, just wait a moment, I'll Google it. We're not necessarily even going to go to Google to find the information. We're just going to look for it online. But Google has moved past the point of being a brand name, and it's entered into the realm of being a verb, which is indeed a synonym for search. Now, once you've got your name, you're going to move on to logo design. And that means you've got to choose a design scheme. So your brand needs a look that's in keeping with the tone of your brand mission and the language. So remember that brand personality and that brand voice. The image you choose to convey that needs to convey it accurately. So is your business and your product a very modern and sleek one? Is it fun and colorful? Is it traditional and classic? Your look should be integrated across all of your media. So once your brand is fixed, once you've got the imaging right for the brand, you're going to be using it across all of your different channels. And that includes your brochures, your website, your online marketing activities, your office signage, any badges that you might make your employees wear, branded uniform type clothing, etc. Remember to keep both your brand name and your logo as simple as possible. You want that brand to be easily recognized and unforgettable. And the simpler it is, the more likely that is to happen. And the best way to do that is to be unique and simple. And if we look at the 3 brands that you see there, those 3 brands are considered to be the most valuable brands, not the most popular, but the most valuable brands in the world. And we all immediately know what they are, and we all know what they do. We all know what the Apple is. We all know what Apple stands for. We all know what Apple makes and what Apple is. Similarly, we all know Amazon and we all know Google. And of course, as I said before, not only do we know the Google brand, but we use it as if it were just another word in the English language. The next step in this process is to design a great logo. So of course, a logo is a graphic element. It's not rocket science. It depicts your brand visually. Of course, this is a lot to ask of one little graphic. There's no set formula to a good logo. So think of some of the biggest brands you can think of. Google, simple serif typeface. Target has a minimal graphic element that very often comes with no accompanying type. And Starbucks, the coffee giant, has a logo that combines graphics and type. Combinations are endless. And just as an example there, you see Starbucks. So Starbucks is a relatively complicated looking logo compared to Target. But when we see that Target, even if it's used completely differently, we immediately think of the brand that is associated with that circle. In addition to representing your brand, your logo helps to embed your brand in your customer's brain. Quick question from Francis. She said, if you've got a well-known logo in Australia and the US, should you change the logo to go into another country? Only if that logo does not translate in that country, Francis. So if you are using a logo that is very distinctly Australian, so let's say, for example, you're using a logo that incorporates a kangaroo, and I don't know what your logo is, so I can't tell you specifically. But if you are using a logo that incorporates the kangaroo, you might want to change it in a country where the kangaroo as an animal is seen just as a caricature, for example. There you might want to refine it, make it more sophisticated. In other markets, it might be a selling point because people associate the kangaroo with all sorts of good things. So it really does depend market to market. The main reason you're going to change it is if your logo could be seen as something offensive in another country. So maybe you're using a logo that has an image on it, which when you read it from right to left instead of left to right, looks completely different and therefore has a different meaning in an Arabic country, for example. And Coca-Cola, very, very well-known brand, as we all know, with that typeface that they use, still has some flack in places like Saudi Arabia, where many people believe that when you read it right to left, it is a phrase that is offensive to the Prophet. Of course, Coca-Cola has always denied that, and they've not changed their branding significantly there, but it is something that you need to be in mind when you go forward. If you send me a copy of your brand, I'll have a look at it and let you know whether I think there could be any issues. Of course, if you are going to go down the track of getting a logo design, please get a professional to do it for you. We all know that there are any number of online design your logo here type things, and you can do it yourself, but you really need to go to the expense and the effort of getting it professionally done, because a professional will also be able to help you with the correct color choice, knowing what those colors are, what they convey, etc. And that also means that you need to use color intentionally. Color is an undeniable part of branding. It can influence the tone of your brand. It can generate emotions and sentiments. The color you choose can effectively make or break your brand. So the first port of call when discussing color is to make a note of color theory and which colors can have specific effects. And I'll show you the color theory chart in a moment. Technology and finance companies tend to use blues and cooler tones in their brandings, whereas health food companies tend to focus on those greens and earthy browns and so on. And this is all part of that color theory and knowing what the effect the color has. Some brands have such specific colors and are so closely associated with that color that they've protected that color for themselves. The Tiffany's blue is a case in point. That color is trademarked by Tiffany and may not be used by anyone else. The Cadbury's purple, for example, is another one of those that is so uniquely associated with Cadbury's. The UPS brown, and boy, it's an ugly color, but everybody sees that color and knows that it belongs to UPS. So here you can see some of those color issues. So if we look at red, for example, we can see it's the color of passion, of emergency, of sexuality, of lust, for example. Those are all the emotions that are most commonly associated with red. But in Eastern colors, red is the color of good luck. So you want to be using reds as much as possible. Yellow represents happiness and joy. The warmth of the color stimulates mental activity, and it's said to capture more attention than any other hue. And if you think of the McDonald's arches, what color are they? So think about the colors, think about the implications, and think about what the color use of your brand is. Also understand how these different colors are used and thought of in different cultures. And again, to your question about your logo, Francis, maybe you want to change it in China, for example, because maybe you're using a color that is not particularly acceptable in China, or indeed just not very effective in China. And I use China as a case in point. It could be a completely different market. It might be South Africa, for example. Some cultures are going to err on the side of caution and have really muted color palettes that they relate to. Others, and many African countries are like this, have large, bold color palettes. So that's the way you're going to look at your branding in those countries. So if we look at a couple of examples, some really memorable logos, and these are just because everybody recognizes them. There's the Nike switch, which, you see the tick, you tend to think of Nike, even if it's not Nike. Coca-Cola, as I mentioned to you, and Coca-Cola has that script, which has presented problems for them in mirror image, as I mentioned. The Mercedes-Benz three-pointed star. Nobody is in any doubt as to whether that is indeed a Mercedes-Benz or any other kind of motor car, because nobody else uses that. Michael, you've asked about the information around the use of black and white and how black and white might relate. Black and white is interesting because black is a color which is very often seen as the color, unfortunately, of death. But it is also a very grave color. So if you have a very serious message to impart, then having black is a good color to use. And when we look at the background there of the Nike switch, they use the switch usually in a bright color or in white, and sometimes it's reversed out on the black. So black is perfectly acceptable to use, but understand that it's a heavy color. It's a dark color, and it is a color that is going to invoke those serious emotions in people. Depending on what your logo is and how you use it, it could have a negative connotation, but in most cases, it's really just gravitas that is denoted. The color white, despite being light and bright in Western cultures, is the color of death in many Eastern cultures. So you need to be careful of using the color white if that is your primary color use in China, in Korea, in Japan, etc., because white there is used in very specific ceremonial contexts, and those are very rarely happy ceremonial contexts. So again, it depends on the culture. In some cases, black, not really well accepted, but if you use it wisely, it can denote seriousness. So if you're a professional services company, for example, black is probably a good one to go with. White light, bright, etc., but not so much in Eastern cultures. So you need to look at the context in which you're going to be using those colors. Of course, if we look from a purely cost perspective, the more colors you use, the more expensive it is to print, etc. If you are still using traditional print methods, whereas black and white is a lot easier and cheaper to print. If you're using a logo that's brightly colored and you want to use a black and white document, you also need to understand how that relates and translates into black and white, and does it actually work? Maybe you want to think about grayscales rather than particular black and white. So I hope that's helped a little bit. In terms of instantly recognizable colors, of course, Google uses 4 colors, and we've come very closely to associate those 4 colors with Google when we see them. Cadbury has that purple, and McDonald's, the bright yellow on the bright red, and the same color palette used everywhere for everything. You're going to have to think about your marketing strategy in the context of your brand voice. It's time to think of the bigger picture, and you've got to act accordingly. So the colors and the style of your logo are going to determine the overall look of your brand, which meaning they should be reflected in all aspects of your business, and they need to be taken into account in your marketing strategy. Your product design, your website design, your social media pages, all of these things are going to have to be aligned to match that initial intention in order to achieve consistency and build positive associations in the minds of your customers. When in doubt, consult the professionals to get it right. And if we look at a brand like McDonald's, and I focus on McDonald's just because they are so instantly recognizable, you can clearly see across a number of different channels how the same look and feel is imparted by McDonald's. So we have the McDonald's website, we have the McDonald's LinkedIn page, and we have the McDonald's Facebook page. And a very subtle branding element that they've introduced here. If you look at the website, you can see that you've got that yellow line, which looks like melted cheese. No one needs to tell you that that's melted cheese. We all know what McDonald's sells, and we all know that a lot of what they sell has cheese on it. If you look at the Facebook page, you see the same line with that same melted cheese. Of course, you can't do that on LinkedIn because you're not allowed to, but the same look and feel of the photographs is used throughout. So once you've got your brand nailed, you need to make sure that you keep that consistency across all your different channels. Now, we've talked pretty much about building a brand in general terms, but of course, you're going to be looking at building a global brand, and there are subtle differences from one to the other. Building a global brand, it's always a lot easier to get your brand recognized and accepted and to build a following for your brand in the market of origin, simply because this is where you start. This is where you understand people best because you are one of those people. It's easier in your home country. Building a global brand really takes a lot of effort. It needs a concerted, well thought through strategy. You need to understand that market. You need to understand marketing in that market. You need to understand consumers in that market. And very importantly, you need to understand your own target consumers in that market. From language missteps to misunderstanding cultural norms, it can be difficult. And just a couple of examples there. When KFC first opened in Beijing, they translated finger licking good into eat your fingers off, which of course just didn't cut through very well in the market. They've since refined it, and they've come up with a better way to explain what they do and a better brand effectively. We have the bath detergent powder, which we all know what that word means in slang. So again, not very great to have as a washing powder look. Some key components to think about when you're looking globally at building a brand. You need to understand customer behavior. Just because consumers have certain buying preferences or habits in one culture doesn't mean that such preferences are universal. And the example there, the US giant Walmart, when they chose locations in China, they chose locations near industrial parks because they thought this is where most of the Chinese consumers work. They'll finish working, they'll buy their shopping, and then they'll go home or they'll buy in their lunch break, etc. The truth is, Chinese consumers don't shop where they work. They shop where they live. So all those Walmart locations were really wasted space because customers simply didn't go into them. You also need to position yourself properly. So you need to understand your competition, and then you need to understand your competitive advantage. So who are the providers of similar products and services that you sell in Australia? Where are they in your target market? And also take into account that your competitors in Australia might not be the same competitors in another market. So for example, if you sell sportswear, look at where people in that market buy similar clothing. Do they buy from specialty stores? Do they buy from online retailers? Or do they get their clothing from sporting goods stores? If you've got a high-end brand in the sportswear market and you're going into a market where the preferred buying location for that particular product is discount retailers, you're going to have to think differently about how you position in that market, because chances are your product is not going to be purchased at the right price point at a discount retailer, and indeed you may not wish to have it in a discount retailer. You also need to know how your brand translates. So a clever product name in one language could translate to something embarrassing in another. So the French cheese brand Kitty, which we see on the shelves here as Kitty, changed its name to Kibi in Iran, because Kitty in the language in Iran, in Iranian, means rotten or rank in Farsi, which of course is not really what you want to be associated with your cheese. So you're going to have to look at your brand name. You're going to have to look at it in the context of every country where you wish to introduce it, understand what it might mean in the local language, or the connotations that it might have. Might mean the same thing, but that meaning could be funny in that language, or it could be offensive in that language. So you need to understand it. And how do you understand it? You understand it by asking people who know, including people on the ground in that country. A lot of research can be done online, but of course the world has reopened. So get on a plane, go over there, have a look at what's on the shelves, take your brand, ask people in the street, what does this mean to you? What do you think this does? And they'll give you some pretty honest answers. Now, in addition to ensuring that your brand translates into other languages, consider what happens from a color perspective. And we've already talked about color, but take into account that in the United States, people tend to like blues and greens. Reds and yellows are very well received in Latin America, for example. Those same colors, red and yellow, very well received in China. Other colors like white, not very well received in the East. So understand what the colors mean in the different cultures, the different cultural connotations, and whatever you do, you always want a positive association with the colors that you choose. Find good people with which to work. Your attorney here can help you to protect your intellectual property overseas, or get somebody there who can do it for you. They can file the appropriate trademark and patent protections in every target market if that's applicable. And also find people on the ground from government circles in Australia who can help you. We're very fortunate in Victoria that we have the Victorian state government offices overseas. They're scattered across the globe. There are people on the ground who know the market, who can assist you on so many different levels. You can see a full list of them on the Global Victoria website. Go to them, ask them the questions that you need asked. And of course, at the federal level, we do have Austrade who are there to help. And we also have DFAT. DFAT is everywhere, and the people who work there are locals very often who can give you some pretty real opinions of how things work. If you do decide to license your product or service name to a manufacturer or a provider overseas, make sure that you exercise tight controls. You want to make sure that the person who has use of your brand name and everything that goes with your brand is reputable, that it won't misuse that name, that it won't misappropriate your name, and that it will follow your own quality control standards. And that means that you need to protect your brand. And in the time we have left today, I want to focus just a little bit on intellectual property because it is vitally important. Intellectual property literally is the property of your mind or proprietary knowledge. It's a productive new idea you create, for example. And this can be an invention, a trademark, a design, a brand, or an application of an idea. Your idea, if that is what you are trying to protect, must be new and original. Of course, it's difficult to figure that out. Applying for an IP right to protect your idea can be critical if you want to build a business and establish your presence in a market. And just a quote there from Craig Fenter, intellectual property is the key aspect for economic development. I want you to think of your intellectual property as a very valuable asset. And one of the key assets you have in the marketing piece is your brand. So some forms of IP require formal application and they require examination before you can claim a right to ownership, and others don't. So in Australia, most forms of IP are administered by IP Australia. And you can see the address there, ipaustralia.gov.au. If you want to register a patent, you want to register a trademark, etc., you are going to do it through IP Australia. Your lawyer might do it for you, but they're still going to do it at IP Australia. Copyright is entirely different. It's a separate form of intellectual property and in Australia does not require registration. In fact, copyright and circuit layout rights are administered by the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications, and they help the government to formulate policy around those issues. But you don't have to register copyright. In fact, in Australia, you cannot. Copyright is implied. If you have created something, you automatically own the copyright here, but that is not the same in every country in the world. So also bear that in mind. In some jurisdictions like China, you do actually need to register your copyright. So the main IP categories that we can register in Australia is patents, trademarks, designs, and plant breeders' rights. One we're going to look at in a little bit more detail today is trademarks, because that is most likely what you will be registering to protect your brand. So very important to note, a trademark is not a business name. It's not a company name, and it's not a domain name. Common misconception is that a trademark is the same thing as a business name. It really is not. So you've registered your business name. You've just got your business name registered. That gives you no legal protection under the law, under the trademark regulation. Why do you want to register your trademark? A registered trademark provides you with the exclusive rights to use, license, and very importantly, sell the mark. It's also a valuable marketing tool because the value of your trademark increases as your business becomes more successful. So you can just imagine how valuable the trademark is of McDonald's, and they've got lots of different trademarks registered. But if you think of those golden arches, if you think of the color yellow against the red background, etc., how valuable is that trademark? And similarly, the Nike one, the Pepsi one, the Coca-Cola one, etc. The bigger the business, the more successful the business, the more valuable the mark. So there are a number of different things that you can trademark. You can trademark your corporate logo, and that's probably where you'll start. The logo and any slug lines associated with that logo. You could trademark a jingle. If you have a very distinctive radio jingle, for example, that everybody associates with you and you don't want anybody to rip it off, you can trademark it. Your business name in the way in which it is used. So if your business name is part of your logo, you can trademark that. If your business name as such is a name that is instantly recognizable, you can trademark the business name. Remember, registering the business name is not the same as trademarking the business name. You might even trademark a particular type of packaging. So there's a brand of olive oil in Australia that uses a very specific sort of pouring mechanism. If you take the top of the bottle off, a little spout pops out. That's the sort of thing that you could trademark if nobody else is using it. A trademark can be a word, it can be a fancy font or a plain font, and you might trademark the font as well. It can be a phrase, a letter, a number, a logo, a picture, an aspect of packaging, or indeed all of the above in concert. A trademark isn't a design. Intellectual property rights for a design are different than they are for a trademark. So a design needs to be unique or new to be registered, but a trademark does not. And a design refers specifically to the new visual features of shape, configuration, etc. And if we look at the examples there, trademark phrasework like the air pocket or the flying kangaroo, the red kangaroo on the Qantas planes. Designs, a new shape of a seat, and it could be the shape of a seat on that same Qantas plane, the new visual features of a Breville juicer, for example. Important to note, you must use your trademark or lose it. You have to actively use your trademark in the course of trade. If you don't, it can be removed on the grounds of non-use, and this is to discourage traders from registering multiple trademarks to stop others from using them. Anyone may apply for removal of a trademark due to its non-use. The earliest a non-use application can be made is 5 years after the filing date of the registered trademark. So if you've registered a trademark and you haven't used it at all for 5 years, I can apply for that trademark to be registered as non-use, and therefore you lose the use of it. IP Australia will send you a letter if that's the case. Trademarks usually last for 10 years from the filing date, provided you use them, and you can renew your trademark 12 months before the renewal date or up to 6 months afterwards. There's a whole process that goes through before a trademark is awarded, and that process is called examination, where IP Australia will check to see that no one else has already registered the mark, etc., etc. We don't have to go through this in detail, other than to know you will wait at least 7 months from when you file your trademark application to when it becomes registered. 7 months. That's how long it takes. That is the minimum time. If the search is really complicated, it can take longer. But due to the international arrangements IP Australia has with other similar bodies all over the world, it cannot take less than 7 months. In other parts of the world, it can take much longer. In China, it can take as long as 2 years, for example. There's a whole report that you get once the examination process is complete. And if there is anything that stops your trademark being registered by you, you will get a report about that. Once you've gone through the process, you've gone through the 7 months, everything is found to be above board, there hasn't been any opposition, your trademark is registered, and you will be notified in writing, and your trademark will also be placed on the register. Vitally important to understand that filing for protection in Australia protects you only in Australia. If you want your trademark protected in other countries, you have to register that trademark in every one of the countries in which you wish to have it protected. You also need to understand that some jurisdictions, and China is one of those, is first to file, while others in Australia, like Australia, are first to use. So the difference is very important, and it can cost you your mark. So in first to file jurisdictions, people can register trademarks without having any use of them and without ever using them. That means that you might arrive in a country and find that your trademark has already been registered there, and therefore you cannot register it and you cannot use it. Here and in others that are first to use, it's whoever uses the trademark that then can file to have that trademark protected. And that's a very important distinction, so you do need to be aware of it. If you're thinking of going into a new market, you need to start the process of registering your trademark in that market way before you actually start doing business in that market to ensure that you get it protected in time. The more successful you are, the more likely the mark is to be ripped off. And as we draw today to a close, I just want to stop on the Madrid system. You can register a trademark in a number of jurisdictions at one time, and that is under the Madrid system. It's a system for the international registration of marks. It provides a means to simultaneously seek protection for a trademark in a whole bunch of different jurisdictions. I've given you an address there. Go along. You can see all the countries that are part of the Madrid system. Australia is one of them, and many others are. Madrid is expensive. So unless you actually intend to be trading in all of the markets that Madrid covers, you might want to think about rather going down the route of individual filing in individual jurisdictions. But if you're going to take on the world and world domination is next on your agenda, then Madrid might very well be the case for you. Now, we have come to the end of our time today, but I am more than happy to take a question or two if there are any. So feel free to type any questions in the chat box and we'll take them. If you can't think of any questions right now, again, feel free to drop me an email and I'll answer the questions for you or find somebody else. So if, for example, you have a very technical question around intellectual property, I'll get an expert to give you an answer on that one. And if you do want a copy of today's slide deck, please drop me an email and I will send you a copy of the deck, and you can see my email on the screen there. To register for any other activities, again, you see the screen, and please go along and do that sooner rather than later. So in this marketing masterclass, after today, we have another 3 sessions, and then this module is done. So next week, we're going to look at marketing versus sales. So what's the difference between marketing and sales? How do they work together? And then we've got a workshop on the 7th of June, and make note of that date. Initially, it was publicized as the 6th of June, but it is in fact the 7th of June. And that is a sales techniques workshop. So we're going to do a little bit of selling, role play, etc. And finally, we'll be looking at marketing, very specifically marketing to international customers. All the other modules as well are starting to move to the pointy end. So make sure that you get in and register before it's too late. Question here from Angeline, who asks, what are some of the risks for rebranding for one particular market? Could it be high risk for the brand to rebrand in market? So I assume your question means, if I rebrand, for example, in Canada, and that brand is different from my brand in all other sectors, is it going to damage my brand overall? No, it won't. If the brand is radically different in that market, all it means is that that brand will have its own character in that market, and it won't be seen as part of the branding that you have elsewhere in the world. If it's a subtle difference, no difference at all. The danger that you face is if you are completely rebranding something which has a very positive brand association elsewhere in the world, you start from scratch if what you're doing is so radically different. So let's take a brand like Penfolds, for example, the wine company. Penfolds, very well-known brand everywhere in the world, same branding used all over. If Penfolds were to decide to go into a completely new market, highly unlikely since they're everywhere already, but let's assume they don't sell in South Africa and they decide to go to South Africa, and they think, well, they're not sure about Penfolds as a name there. They think instead of calling it Penfolds, they're going to call it Aussie Red. It might do very well in that market, but it's going to have to establish itself from scratch, because no one will ever have heard of Aussie Red, and they can't leverage anything that they've done anywhere else under the Penfolds name when they're trying to promote Aussie Red. So I hope that answers your question, Angeline. It really does depend on what the market is and how radically you are going to rebrand. The worst case scenario is that you cannot leverage any of your earlier successes if it's a completely different brand. If there are any other questions, I'll take another one or so. And if there aren't, we'll probably call today at an end. I think we've probably covered as much as we can. I'm conscious of the fact that we have gone over time a little. So I'm going to thank you all for your attention. As always, it's great to have you online, and I look forward to you joining us for the next session, and also for the sessions in the other modules. Thanks, everyone. And if you want a copy of the slide deck, please remember to send me that email. Have a great afternoon, and go off and do some great business. Goodbye.